Hello artists, this is Mr. David. In this lesson, we are going to combine a few of the painting and brush techniques we've learned so far. First, we need to prepare our paper. This time we are going to work very small. Take one of your sheets of watercolor paper and measure 3" by 3" squares. Using your ruler, measure the short side in half, making 3" marks at the top and bottom. On the long side, make two 3" marks at the top and bottom. Connect your marks with lines using your straight edge and cut with scissors. This will make 6 3" squares for plenty of practice. We are going to do little 3" square watercolor landscape paintings. We'll be using our wet on wet, wet on dry, and glazing techniques. Here are some examples of my practice art. Ours are going to look similar. Take one of your 3 by 3 squares and tape borders with your specially prepared not so sticky tape. Wet your brush and use the side of it to wet all of your paper, just enough so it's glossy. We'll use our wet on wet technique, painting wet paint on a wet surface, and make a gradation from dark blue to light blue. Make sure to always prepare your paint on your palette first, using water to mix in with your paint. Blend your gradation using a lot of paint at the top and not so much paint at the bottom. This time, I've used my paper towel to dab and test my paint, and also check the wetness of my brush. Now crumple your spare clean paper towel and use it to dab cloud shapes in your blue wash. Now let your art dry. I'm going to mix some green and yellow to make a wet on dry gradation. A wet on dry gradation is where we paint wet paint on dry paper. Take your time when mixing so that you get just the color that you like. Draw a straight line with your paint in the center of your paper, and paint a gradation down to the bottom using water to pull down the paint. Let your paint do some of the work. Don't smooth it out too much. Our paint will flow into the water and create some interesting patterns. Let it dry. Get some clear water on your brush and wet just above the green. We are going to paint some trees that are very far away on the horizon. Now use the very tip of your brush and dab little tiny dots of paint on the wet paper where you want your trees to go. Make sure not to do too much. In watercoloring, sometimes we only need to use a very small amount of paint. Dab in a few tiny trees. They are far away, so they are very small. Let your trees dry. Once they are dry, get some darker green on your brush and use the very tip to dab in some shadows on your trees using our wet on dry technique. Remember, you only need to do very little. Let your shadows dry. Now we're going to mix some yellow and green with a dab of brown. The color you mix for this grass should be darker so it will look closer or nearer to us. Make tiny upward strokes with the tip of your brush to draw some grass. When painting your grass, leave plenty of space and let some of your dry green show through. I'm going to use an even darker green for some shadows in my grass. Now while that dries, clean your brush and mix some red and orange onto your palette. Use the very tip of your brush to dab some flowers growing in your grass. Remember, don't do too much. Don't be afraid to let some of the dots or flowers overlap and blend together. Now let it dry. Once you're all done, you can carefully peel back your tape and reveal a nice crisp white border. I've already done a couple. Each one will look slightly different. Now we can practice. This time, we can do a watercolor landscape that's similar, but this time we will paint a big cozy tree that is growing near us. Let's tape our paper, and remember, We always let our paint dry between each step. For this painting, we will use the same steps as our first, up to right before we paint the grass and flowers. Here, we are going to paint a big old tree instead. First, we paint a nice wet on wet blue gradient and dab some clouds with our paper towel. Now, we draw a green horizon and gradation. This time, I added the little trees far on the horizon at the same time. Be sure just to do a little with the tip of your brush. Once it's dry, let's mix some dark green and paint in some shadows on our horizon. Here I'm using just some water to pull down the paint that I put on the paper. Then I dab in some shadows on my faraway trees. It doesn't have to be really detailed, because everything we are painting here is really far away. Now that we've gotten to this step, let's get some dark green on our brush with water. Paint a nice sloping hill close to the bottom using our glazing technique, painting wet paint over dried paint. Add a couple of little bushes on the side. Remember to keep your green a bit darker than the green in your gradation. This way, what we are painting will look closer to us because it is darker. Use a little more water and mix some more dark green on your brush. Use the tip of your brush to carefully draw in a big old tree. Start with the trunk and some branches. Then dab in some leaves with the tip of your brush. Don't be afraid to let them overlap and to bunch them up, but make sure to leave some spaces for the blue to peek through. My tree goes right out of sight, off the edge of the page, so we really don't see all of it. This way, the tree will look really close to us, almost as if we are sitting under it. Really take your time and think about where you want to put all your branches and leaves. When you are satisfied with the shape of your tree, let's get some purple and mix it with our green and use it to paint the shadows of our tree. We are going to go over the tree we just drew and add some shadow. When you're adding shadow, leave some of the green from the tree that you just painted and let it show. We also want to make sure that we let some of the blue from our background show through. Leaves have shadows too, so be sure not to forget those. When we are done with our shadows, we can use the purple green and the very tip of our brush to add a few small plants and blades of grass. Here I'm going back and forth to make sure all the shadows I want are added before I finish. See how I've let some of the blue from the sky show through? Once you've let it all dry, you can peel off the tape. Here are some examples of my practice art. Practice over and over again and see how many different watercolors you can do. Remember just to enjoy yourself and have fun!